This morning I learned that the chief of police has Red Bull for breakfast.
I heard.
At least sometimes.
Can we do some people do a Spotify Wrapped. Could we do a top 5 most unhinged breakfasts and morning drinks? Like, we got to put Sandeep Kaushik's Diet Coke in the morning up there.
That's way up there.
Police Chief Shon Barnes, Red Bull.
Some
else?
people freaking fast. And this blows my mind. Some people say I never eat breakfast.
I don't do anything.
Yeah.
I don't drink anything. Like, I don't have coffee. I have a friend, one of my close friends, he's a producer for NPR, gets up every morning, nothing. What propels you? And I ask him this all the time, like, what gets you going through the day?
So he's like a replicant, basically.
Exactly.
That's not a human body process.
No.
Personally, I am fueled by the love of podcasting.
Exactly. And on that note, it's time for Sound Politics.
It is time.
This is Sound Politics. I'm Scott Greenstone.
And I'm Libby Denkmann. And Scott, it is still raining.
It is still raining as we record this. It's probably still raining as you're listening to this. It feels like the rain is ever present. I never, before I moved here, I didn't even know that atmospheric river was a thing.
It didn't start being a thing until I feel like I was a teenager growing up here. I mean, it was late to arrive to the vernacular.
Bomb cyclone.
Yeah, that's relatively new.
Yeah, I feel like, Well,
moisture coming from the Pacific and tropical areas and flowing up like a river and just sitting over us, dumping millions of gallons of water.
That's the non-scientific, non-fancy way to say it.
Oh, I have a degree in BS. Yeah.
Don't we all as journalists? But as we're sitting here taping this, we are watching to make sure that literal dams and levees near the Snohomish and Skagit rivers, just aren't going to fully break. There's been historic rainfall and flooding that has evacuated potentially. We're still trying to get good numbers around this as we're speaking, but we were looking at maybe 100,000 people north of Seattle.
Especially in Skagit. Yeah, Skagit River Valley.
Yeah, the 100-year floodplain is what they call it up there. That's another term that I never heard until recently. But the governor has declared a statewide emergency.
Yeah, and that's mostly to get FEMA funding from the federal government.
Right.
Or hopefully get that funding, because everybody should recall that last year's bomb cyclone did not get an emergency declaration from the federal government. We didn't get money for that, despite all the damage to people's homes and businesses.
Yes, and we appealed, and they still said
it was
no.
swatted down.
So that's the developing situation at the moment. And I don't know. I mean, it'll be interesting to see. It is Ferguson's, first real emergency. We talked about the bomb cyclone, but that was during Inslee's tenure. So obviously that is something we are going to be paying attention to, but it changes so quickly moment by moment. The conversation that we have really been thinking about the last few days, while we've been watching, forecasts of rain through one eye, we have been putting our ears to the ground also at the same time. We can do it all. About this rumor circulating in Seattle. And this has, something to do with a really important issue of policing that we're going to talk about today on the show. This rumor that we were listening for and about and trying to track down turned out to be unfounded. The rumor was that Seattle's incoming mayor-elect, Katie Wilson, was going to fire the city's police chief, Shon Barnes.
Yeah, which would have been surprising. He'd been on the job for less than a year. He was interim in January, confirmed in July. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I was at Katie Wilson's transition team kickoff Tuesday, and she was asked about it. She would not say anything. She just said she had an announcement coming.
Oh, an announcement. I mean, usually when you have an announcement coming, people don't assume that the announcement is status quo. We're going to keep the police chief.
Yeah, nothing's going to change. And
when you prep people for an announcement, usually there's something bigger coming.
But that was in fact, what it was, that she announced that she is keeping the police chief, at least for now.
So rumors were not true.
Yeah.
Basically. I will just quickly say my understanding, based on, this is such a reporter term, based on sources, is that Mayor-elect Wilson did consider her options here. It was not a foregone conclusion that Chief Barnes would stick around. But also, just to put on our political strategist hats here, that would have been a huge move for the mayor-elect, especially somebody with her progressive bona fides and a history of talking about defund ideas. It's not a common thing for recent Seattle mayors to fire the police chief when they come into office. Mike McGinn kept John Diaz, who was appointed by Nichols. Jenny Durkin wanted Kathleen O'Toole to stick around in charge of the department, although she had already announced she was leaving. Durkin did, to keep O'Toole. Bruce Harrell hired Adrian Diaz, technically, but he had already become interim under Durkin.
Right.
I mean, so it hasn't really been a thing in recent years. But then also, can you imagine, Scott, the amount of time that Wilson would have had to spend answering questions about this and then be wrapped up in this idea that the progressive mayor was coming in and rattling the cages of the, police department, and then the search for the replacement, all of that would have been a lot. So it's not a surprising call for Wilson to keep Barnes.
No, it is not a surprising call. But here is my hypothesis about why so many in the, journalist, political consulting, gossipy community were so obsessed with this rumor. And I'm going to zoom out, okay, if I can. It has been 5 years since, defund the police and the reform efforts post George Floyd. And progressives, I think you can tell with Katie Wilson, they think they went too far left in the immediate aftermath of 2020.
I think voters told them they went too far left. Told them that.
And that's why, right, Seattle got 4 more years of more moderate and conservative candidates who are now gone. Policing was not a huge part of the conversation this year with the election. It was in there, but, I think affordability, housing, cost of living, all the things that we have talked ad nauseum about.
Yeah, I think it definitely helped that, crime trends had turned around, hiring was coming back. So a lot of that conversation just wasn't what it was 3-4 years ago.
Well, and there wasn't necessarily one big incident like there have been in the past where the conduct of a police officer was called into question. So now we're just all kind of sitting here wondering how Katie Wilson, who once supported defund the police but no more, is going to run the police department. And at the same time, some of those movements from, 2020 that started in 2020, not defund the police, but the idea of having alternatives to armed cops, right, especially for mental health crisis calls, those ideas are finally actually being realized, some of them by this current mayor, Bruce Harrell. So I want to talk about all that on the show today. And we are actually going to hear from the chief himself because, Libby, you sat down with him just a little while ago.
That's right.
All that and more when we come back on Sound Politics.
Be right back.
And we're back with Sound Politics. So, Libby, you sat down with Chief Shon Barnes at 8 a.m. this morning.
I did.
He had his Red Bull.
He was prepared. He's a caffeine person. I am too, but I just wasn't. I have to say, I'm not fully awake until later in the day. But yes, he had his Red Bull already.
You're the noon show host. It's like
for a reason.
You've done Morning Edition. You've lived
Morning Edition is the biggest audience of any NPR station. And so Morning Edition is a wonderful job, but that's if you like mornings, and I do not.
So okay, but let's talk about this 8 a.m. conversation with Chief Barnes. Did that conversation tell you anything about what, this question that we've been talking about, progressive policing or how progressives are going to run the police department for the next 4 years in Seattle?
Yeah, we talked about how he's going to work with the incoming mayor, what he's watching in the coming year. There has been a lot of shakeups at SPD. I mean, the new chief, he only came in January. There's a new union contract now, one that expands these policing alternatives, the care teams. You can hear, if you want to hear the whole interview with Chief Barnes, that is over on the Sound Side feed.
And we'll put a link to that in the show notes.
Yeah. But, Scott, there are 3 things that stood out to me, 3 moments that I thought would be good for us to talk about here on Sound Politics.
Awesome.
First, it is the really tenuous position that Barnes could be in under this new mayor.
So she said she's going to keep him, but for how long?
Well, I'll let you hear in his voice and how he kind of took the question that I asked about how he's going to work with Mayor Wilson. Second, he does want to change policing in Seattle, but what that might look like is something we got into. And third, Barnes' relationship with the union for rank and file cops, SPOG, and kind of this new contract, what he thinks about the dissent over the contract, and other implications of union negotiations. So I want to get to all of those things.
Yeah. I'm especially interested to talk about SPOG, the Seattle Police Officers Guild, because it is kind of the biggest conservative institution left in town, I think.
Yeah, it definitely is. So let's get to the first part of this interview that I wanted to highlight with Chief Shon Barnes.
I want to be clear that this is an opportunity that I have to continue to earn every single day. So every day when I walk through that door, I know that what's given can be taken. And so I have to work extremely hard for the community here in Seattle, for our elected officials, and for the members of the Seattle Police Department.
So I had asked him, how is he going to be working with the new mayor? Does that sound like somebody who was completely confident he would have a job going forward, Scott?
No, that sounds like somebody who believed the rumors.
Yeah.
And maybe, I'm not going to speculate on whether or not Katie Wilson was actually considering firing him. But when you stand there and someone asks you, you're going to fire the police chief, and you say, I'll have an announcement soon on that, I think you wouldn't necessarily mind if the police chief is kind of thinking, gosh, do I have a job and willing to do whatever, it takes to stay in that job? We talked about this. Barnes has not been in the job very long. He comes from a much smaller police department, Madison, Wisconsin. But, he was sort of rocketed to the headlines, national headlines, at the end of his time at Madison, Wisconsin, after that Christian school shooting in Madison. And so then he took this job in Seattle. It's kind of his big break. He's been known for making big headlines. I don't think he wants to leave. No one wants to get fired.
I'm curious about, what these conversations were like. Barnes said that he had a number of conversations with the mayor-elect over the last couple of weeks, and that they did find common ground on their vision. And one of the things they found common ground on was something I did hear Katie Wilson talk about in the debate I moderated and in other settings, which is this idea. It's kind of an old idea that's back again, which is community policing and what that might mean. So here is Barnes talking about the idea of neighborhood resource centers that they're piloting that are kind of like, having officers who are part of this community. They are connected to certain beats and certain communities, and you see them all the time. It's an old school beat cop idea. And he says that that's why he got into policing, this kind of idea that SPD is piloting, and he wants to expand it in Seattle.
Earlier this year, we launched a pilot called the Neighborhood Police Resource Center. There were 2 officers that we selected to work the Magnuson Park neighborhood area. And those officers worked for 90 days. They were able to get out and get involved with the community. They were able to do self-initiated police activity on suspicious activity. We saw a decrease in crime. We saw an increase in how the community viewed us. And so that's the type of policing that I really got into this job for.
When he says self-initiated police activity, I get the sense here that the point of this whole thing is, instead of you calling 911 and we come from wherever the nearest precinct is, we're already there. Yeah. We see something going on. We walk up and say, hey, what's going on? Is that do I have that right?
It's like officer friendly, It's this, the beat cop that patrols your neighborhood, and you talk to them about what's going on, and they proactively, hey, they might know some kids in the area that, maybe they're on the borderline. They need to be connected with some resources, things like that. The thing that kind of blows my mind about community policing conversations today is that these were very popular maybe 10 years ago, in the mid-2010s. And then in the post-George Floyd era, at least when I was in Los Angeles, I can't comment on Seattle because at the time I was reporting in Los Angeles, Black Lives Matter and many other police reform advocates saw community policing as somewhat of an insidious type of presence, that it was a part of over-policing. It was a part of a propaganda type of thing to sort of say, oh, your friendly neighborhood cop, that's not a reality. These, folks are here to try to incarcerate you. And so suddenly community policing was not an acceptable solution to try to build trust with the community. Again, this is from people who were activists at the time.
Right.
But now we hear folks like Katie Wilson and, again, Shon Barnes echoing her, really talking about the benefits of those types of connections in community. It's interesting. There are a lot of changes since 2020 that have stuck around and actually expanded, like the care teams. But then some things feel like everything old is new again,
I totally get that. And having been here in Seattle covering some of those protests and stuff, it wasn't so much the sense that I got from advocates was not so much that it was insidious to have a cop walking the beat and knowing the neighborhood, but more so that we have tried to reform the police. And this is, again, these leftist advocates who are saying defund. Reform didn't work was their argument. And now you see folks, progressives going back to that reform argument and saying, no, we can actually do it. Because the argument always was, I think at the time, we never really reformed the police really well.
Mm-hmm.
We saw groups like the Seattle Police Officers Guild. We saw police unions really fight reforms in a successful way and stop them when they were negotiating the contracts with the city, like the city of Seattle, which I think
interesting. You bring up union information. It's as though that I have a cut from my interview with Chief Shon Barnes, the Seattle Police chief, where I asked him about this recent contract that was signed between the city and SPOG. The city council approved it this week with some dissent. We're going to get to that. Mm-hmm. And I asked him about both the meaning of the negotiations, which resulted in higher pay for uniformed police officers, and also an expansion of the care teams, which was an important provision. And
those care teams, just to remind listeners, are mental health crisis responders, basically
unarmed civilians. Yeah.
And the idea is with this expansion that you could call 911 or maybe 988 and not actually get a cop at all.
They can deploy alone. Yeah,
exactly.
Which is very
huge.
new. Yeah, and prior to that, there was also a cap on the number of care responders because it was technically what they call covered work under the union contract. Now there's no limit to the number of care responders, and they can deploy without an armed police officer. That is big, but there were questions about that. And that includes 3 members of the city council pointing out that a number of oversight provisions that reformers had wanted were not included in the contract, like subpoena power for OPA and other agencies, the Office of Police Accountability, when there's an investigation, like to get cell phone records.
Texts.
Yeah, texts. So I asked, first off, the chief about how he felt about this. What is his role when these types of negotiations are going on and there's dissent about them?
People need to understand that the police chief is not involved in contract or labor negotiations. If we were, it would look very, very different. My concern is management rights and being able to manage the police department the way I want to. Their perspective is a little bit different.
So obviously not involved in the negotiations. However, when I asked him about these criticisms from the city council members who voted against the SPOG contract, like Rob Saka, here's what he had to say.
When it comes to subpoena power, I really think that's a government overreach. To use your personal cell phone or subpoena someone's personal cell phone as a condition of their employment is an overreach. It is almost impossible to get a personal cell phone, which technically is a computer, without a judge's subpoena in a criminal case, let alone in an administrative investigation.
It's interesting because okay, so how I understand this is essentially, we do see it on in places like the King County sheriff. Voters agreed, in 2020 that we should have subpoena power, that civilian review boards should be able to see things like texts and things like that. That doesn't always necessarily, that can be subject to these negotiating and bargaining contracts. I do not know. I'm in a union, but union bargaining, it can be so complicated. It's really the weedsiest part of the weeds. But how I basically understand it is, he is saying that our texts, our officers, is he talking about body cam footage? Why does he think that all of these records should not necessarily be available to the public.
He's not talking about body cams. He's specifically pushed back on texts on personal cell phones, and then he brought up this idea of wives' cell phones also being involved, or spouses, I think, cell phones also being involved. He feels that is part of something that you would have to see in a criminal investigation, that it's too invasive. So it's kind of an interesting walking the line where he was very frustrated with SPOG over the lack of ability to expand the care teams. He mentioned that he was able to expand care teams, or the equivalent, very quickly, the civilian responders in Madison. But the union stuff, the union negotiations held things up here in Seattle, and that had surprised him. So that's kind of a split with SPOG perspective from the chief. Then he turns and he says, I feel sympathy with, the pushback against getting access to these cell phone records as part of the disciplinary process. It's kind of, he's threading a needle there. He's kind of like walking a tightrope in between, breaking with what the union would want for his uniformed officers and what they, the arguments they're making about oversight.
Yeah, it's really interesting. He's between these two groups. SPOG, we talked about, the Seattle Police Officers Guild, very conservative union with a very conservative head of the union, Mike Solon, who, by the way,
rival podcaster.
He hosts the Hold the Line podcast. And, when this contract passed, by the way, he saw it as a huge win. The union tweeted out a picture of him wearing a superhero outfit in front of the Space Needle. The superhero outfit said PS on it, which we were talking about. We thought maybe that means public safety. I'm not sure. It's in like
Proud Solon.
Proud. Yeah, that's right. It's in the same font. He kind of looks like the guy, like the villain from The Incredibles. So I don't know what he's going for there. But
I want to know who photoshopped it. Mike, was that you?
No, it's clearly AI. It's clearly AI.
Okay, Mike, was that you putting that into the AI prompts? I'll have to do some outreach on that.
The wording of the tweet read, and this is really the key thing that I wanted to bring up: moderates 1, socialists 0. So, if you're considering, like, why are we talking about policing on a podcast? Like, obviously it's all political, but I think he really sees that as a win for not the Katie Wilsons of the world, but the more, the pro-policing advocates. And you've got this new chief kind of sitting in between that, the union that represents his rank and file officers, and then folks like Katie Wilson, who clearly wants to see reform. Although
the expansion of the care teams is a win for reformers, but it also was a big bargaining chip for the union, right?
Yeah.
It was something, again, that other places in Madison had seen, the union stepping aside, and that the expansion happened very quickly. But I think SPOG, for their leverage, smartly knew that was an important thing to hold. Speaking of hold the line on, and then be able to use that in negotiations. And really quick, before we wrap up the conversation about, the union involvement, this was the first time I talked to Barnes after the consent decree was over, the federal consent decree over use of force at SPD. This conversation about union negotiations is something he highlighted very clearly in the wrap-up process of that consent decree. He said, I believe that collective bargaining, which is left for the city to negotiate accountability, may well not be the best way to do it. So he specifically called out the fact that so many reforms get held up by collective bargaining as a big obstacle here.
Okay, and that's interesting. It's a huge moment for the city, when it comes to policing, because this consent decree, which has overshadowed our, police department for years and years. It started 15 years ago in 2010 when a Native American woodcarver
John T. Williams.
was shot by police. It's, after that, the Obama administration put us under a consent decree to reform our use of force. And, now Mayor Harrell has managed to, end it, right? Or work with the judge that you mentioned to end it. But there is like this question. It's like the end of an era. We're kind of looking forward and seeing like, what is the future? And it's clear that Chief Barnes is kind of like the union needs to, I don't know, get on the wagon and move and,
Yeah, but he's also not fully on board with what the city council members who dissented on the contract want. And that's clear from what he said about the text messages.
Yeah.
He did liken moving a police department to turning a cruise ship, which is, it's actually like management speak. It's kind of like business school speak, nudging the barge or like turning the cruise ship. That's a very classic leadership analogy. But that he emphasized he sees this just being a start of reforms, that there's still a long way to go. So, certainly not going to say, okay, wipe our hands of it. We've now fixed policing in Seattle. That's not the message, particularly with a new mayor coming in with a very progressive point of view that Barnes is going to be putting out there.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so at the end of it, do you think that you would call Chief Barnes a progressive police chief?
I don't think I'm qualified to say that he is or is not progressive. I think he's somebody who highlights his work on reform in the past, and again, expanding the care teams in Madison. But, he's certainly not on board with everything reformers want. And he's in a tight position here, hoping to keep his job. So he's got to, again, be negotiating those contrary forces.
Yeah, it does.
How was that for negotiating contrary forces on an answer?
You should be a police chief, or maybe you should be at the union
yeah, that's
bargaining
a great
table.
Idea.
You should be at the union bargaining table,
wow,
Libby.
You really want this city to crash. You want this cruise ship to crash into the iceberg.
Well, it'll be really interesting to see just, how the city's first real progressive mayor in more than a decade is going to negotiate the relationship with police who already felt like the city was too progressive.
Sure will be.
And we'll be watching all that on Sound Politics. That is all the time we have for today. Thanks for listening. Our show is produced by Hans Anderson. He's the one who pulls those cuts. He's the one who is in our ear telling us, when we say something wrong.
He's the one who's
need to say something better.
Making the wrap-up signal in the other room right now.
And our editor is Cat Smith.
I'm Libby Denkmann.
And I'm KUOW politics reporter Scott Greenstone.
This show is only possible because of your support. We have a on-the-air pledge drive coming up next week at KUOW. So you're going to hear me saying this a lot if you're a radio listener. But if you're a podcast listener, I'm only going to say this once.
Can't say it enough.
Donations are the reason that we are able to do this work at KUOW. And for folks who, throw us a few bucks in the link in our podcast notes, it really makes a huge difference. This is something, emails go out around the building. Podcasts are something that everybody's trying to find that strategy to monetize. So if you are a listener who appreciates this work, consider supporting it. Again, link in the show notes. You are the wind beneath our wings, and we really appreciate you.
You're the Red Bull wind beneath our wings.
You are the Red Bull wings. Yeah.
The wings. Yeah, that's right.
Thanks, everybody. See you next week.